Hello everyone, welcome to the Art Block. My name is Derek and I'll be your host once again. This is episode 4 and today I'm going to be talking about the monoculture. Now, monoculture is an idea that has fascinated me for quite a while now. If you don't know what that is, it's this idea of one culture that we all draw from, one culture that we all experience together. And I was really struck by this idea from one photo that really stuck in my head, which was this photo of people gathered together in Times Square, and they're watching the series finale of Seinfeld on that big screen in Times Square, and just the idea of one show captivating people so much that in New York City and Times Square, where there's seemingly unlimited things to do, you're standing on the street watching this TV show as it aired. And that is something that will never happen again. No one TV show or movie or anything could be so big to capture the attention of anyone. And I have mixed feelings about this idea of the monoculture because in a way, losing that is sad in a way. Losing that communal experience of everything because that is what pretty much everybody loves about the movie theater experience. That you're going into a theater and you're watching something together with all these people, strangers, and having one experience that you can share. And that is what kind of the monoculture gave us for so many years. Everybody was watching the same things and talking about them and experiencing them together. And now everything is diluted. It's splintered. Everybody has their own favorite things. There's a million different things to choose from. And I think the last true example I have of the monoculture in full effect was Breaking Bad. I don't know if you remember when that final season aired. Breaking Bad had always been really popular and it was always winning Emmys and stuff. That final season, I feel like everybody got caught up to it. And as that final season started airing, I was catching up with all those episodes and, falling in love with the show and just being very excited about it. Everybody seemed excited and thrilled, and everybody wanted to talk about how much they love the show and what they thought was going to happen. And that was a huge moment. I remember everybody online, that's all people were talking about was the finale of the show. And I remembered there was a website called Uprocks that they were giving away like t-shirts that said goodbye in the logo of the Breaking Bad title card, and it was a huge cultural moment that I think the majority of people shared. And you can make the argument that Game of Thrones was that way as well, and maybe that's my personal bias because I wasn't crazy about Game of Thrones. I watched the first season, and after that I really stopped caring. But even with that, by the time the show ended, even people I knew personally who were huge fans of the show were, openly talking about how it was not as good as it used to be, and, the passion of the audience really dwindled towards the end. And like I said, that is kind of the last gasp of the monoculture, in my opinion. There are certain examples of today. I know there are some people out there who kind of deny the existence of a monoculture. They think that it's not really a thing. And people could point to things like Taylor Swift, football. The Super Bowl is always the most watched thing in the world. And you can point to Star Wars as well as things that kind of everybody everywhere likes in some capacity, or a majority of people do. That's the popular thing. I would say even those things are in somewhat a diminished version of themselves in some way. I know Taylor Swift just had, the biggest tour of her career and the biggest, maybe the biggest year or two of any artist, but still, these big cultural things are just not really what they used to be. As far as TV shows go, I always looked at the list of the most watched TV episodes ever. The series finale of MASH is high up there, Dallas, and Cheers and all these shows, nothing will ever be that big again. And that is really because of the options that we have now. Having options makes Hollywood have to compete with individual creators. When there are 3 channels on and nowhere else to go, you'll watch just about anything. I mean, when I was a kid, I grew up loving late night TV. I watched The Tonight Show. I loved Conan, and I would always stay up and I would try to watch Last Call with Carson Daly, a show I loved, and that was how I discovered kind of obscure, weird art and artists I would have never heard of otherwise. And I remember seeing Adam Carolla on that show, the comedian and podcaster, and he was talking about, this is kind of in the early days of this podcast, talking about how he grew up watching a show like Maude, right? Where he didn't care about the show. He didn't care about the characters. He wasn't compelled by it or anything, but it was just on. He was just watching the show. And when he was doing his content on his own website and going and finding an audience that really cared, that was very passionate about it, he had less viewers than, the biggest television show, but the audience really cared. And that was the difference. That is kind of the crux of what I'm talking about today in the monoculture. You sacrifice the shared experience of something massive and huge and a cultural phenomenon, but you gain better quality art, in my opinion. And that's the trade-off. People say there are no solutions in life, there's only trade-offs, and this is one. That is one of them. I noticed that movies continue to just get bigger. The only time you see small character-driven movies are at the Oscars, which, as I'm filming this, the Oscars are about to start a little while tonight. You see them at the Oscars and you see them on streaming. But the only movies that get a real push for the theater are the massive CGI-laden blockbuster superhero movies. Right now, looking at the list of the top 10 box office grossing movies of all time, and ironically, they almost all are from the past 10 years. They're mostly superhero movies, because that's what Hollywood has to offer. I think when it sees the increasing options of things on streaming or on the internet, forget streaming like Netflix and things like that, but TikTok and YouTube, and there are so many places for people to get entertainment. So what can Hollywood do but make things bigger and bigger and bigger, and spending billions of dollars on movies so they can show something just really massive and get you into the theater. That is all it has. So everything has to be bigger and bigger and bigger. Only one movie from the top 10 is not from this past decade or so, and that is Titanic. Everything else, Avatar, Avengers Endgame, and I want to mention the third highest grossing movie of all time, which is Avatar, The Way of Water, the sequel. And I noticed that nobody talks about that movie. The first Avatar movie, when it was first released, was a phenomenon and nobody would shut up about it. But I feel like after it came out initially, nobody cared. Nobody talked about it, did not have that lasting impression. And I thought that was very odd, that the movie that's the highest grossing film ever, and everybody was saying was so amazing. I still have never seen the movie, by the way, so just so you know that. I thought it was odd that it did not stay in the minds of the public very well. And I remember when Avatar 2 came out a few years ago, or a couple years ago now, and I didn't see that in the theater either, but it just automatically kind of became one of the highest grossing movies ever. Never heard anybody talk about it. In fact, my friend Taven, who, if you watch my documentary, Essential Exhibition, which is on this YouTube channel as well, he's interviewed in that film. That's how I met him. He's the manager of a movie theater. And I asked him about Avatar, The Way of Water, and he said nobody talked about it. The theater filled up, and it was very busy, but nobody seemed to really care that much, you know? And that seems to be a running theme where these things are so big and you're told statistically it's the biggest thing ever. It's the biggest thing ever. And nobody talks about it. I don't hear anybody talking about these things that are suddenly breaking records, you know? And just look back into the years, like I mentioned, Breaking Bad, even before that, all those movies that you remember were phenomenons and everybody was always talking about, you know, it was part of the culture. It was like the pulse of everything. And now people on like TikTok, you know, they have sometimes like upwards of 100 million followers and I don't know who they are, you know. I mentioned Addison Rae, who has a combined 100 million followers on Instagram and TikTok. You know, I had no idea who she was, and I didn't know who she was until she was in the Eli Roth film Thanksgiving. You know, and I found out who she was from that. You know, but she is an influencer, and she's now becoming a pop star, and but she has all these followers. I didn't know who she was. I know probably a lot of people out there on the street don't know who she is either, but she has a massive following. I think it's the same thing of Charlie D'Amelio, I think is how you pronounce her name. I still don't know who the hell this woman is. I don't know what she does or what got her all of these followers, but she is super famous with a massive following on TikTok, you know, and she has some like Hulu reality show that appears to be some sort of like Kardashian family knockoff, you know. People are just incredibly famous online, but that online fame does not translate to the outside world where people are talking about it, you know. And I want to mention a music artist that I really became obsessed with, the Suicide Boys. If you're not familiar with them, they are a rap duo from Louisiana, and they came about in 2015 as part of the whole like SoundCloud rap era, same time as people like Juice WRLD and Lil Peep and Lil Pump and XXX Tentacion and all those folks, you know, and they have a sound that is so eclectic and strange and unique, and all of their music is incredible in my opinion. And I started listening to them in early 2023. I'd heard of them before, and I had heard people had recommended them to me in the past, but I never listened to them. And they were on a Spotify playlist, one of their songs, and I just started like kind of falling in love with their music. And within that same year, I was able to attend their concert. They have their 2023 Grade A tour in Kansas City, and me and my wife went to see it at the T-Mobile Center. It was a great show. I had a wonderful time, and the arena was full. You know, to see all those songs that I had grown so attached to and loved so much being shouted back at the artist from you know, a room full of very passionate fans, that was amazing. And the idea that they started this not from any kind of typical industry way, but they started it from posting on SoundCloud and just being online and creating art from their own home and just working on their computer. And they became these artists that had like over 10 million monthly listeners on Spotify. They were able to fill up arenas for their fans all over the country and all over the world that loved, you know, that really loved what they did. They talk about their independent philosophy in their music. The fact that it's still on some level a very independent operation, I think, is amazing. And that to me is very inspiring as an artist who wants to be independent and does not want to rely in any way rely on the establishment of traditional media or the Hollywood structure, you know. And to see them, you know, grow enormously organically when they're not a type of act that any sort of label or executive would want to put their money behind, you know? And there's so many like examples of this, and obviously people talk about Joe Rogan. I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan, and you know, he's somebody who, you know, that podcast started, you know, out of his own house, and now it's kind of the biggest media kind of out there. He interviewed who is now the sitting president and vice president, and some say he had some real sway on the election, and the fact that podcast starting out of nowhere, you know, of course he was famous already in the Hollywood structure, but that podcast growing, you know, organically to become a massively influential thing, that's amazing on its own. I know, I want to mention Tim Dillon, right? Tim Dillon's my favorite comedian. I watch his podcast, The Tim Dillon Show, all the time. And that show is hilarious, but it's, you know, he is screaming and ranting about the Clintons and Epstein and, you know, all sorts of things. And he was able to take that podcast and make himself a massive success. He was able to parlay that into the kind of financial success that he bought a $4 million estate in the Hamptons, where you can now be a comedian who creates a podcast where he's just ranting about politics, and you can be in the same area as Jay-Z and Beyonce. I've mentioned Kill Tony on this show before. I'll mention it again because it's my favorite thing. I think it's the most entertaining show in the world. And that show came about as a show started in the basement of a comedy club, essentially, just a little over a decade ago, and now it's grown to the level where they're doing live shows in Madison Square Garden and arenas all over the world now, and every episode of that show gets well over 1 million views. You know, that is the kind of story that I find really inspiring. You know, that we can have a media that is truly a meritocracy. You know, if you create the best content or the best music, you have like the funniest comedy, you have the best of whatever you do, and you put it out there, you have as good of a chance of finding an audience as anyone in Hollywood does, with the full weight of the money machine and the establishment of that industry working behind it. You know, I think that's wonderful. You know, and I don't like the splintering of everything. I don't like that everybody has is in their own world in some way, but also the fact that there's something out there for everyone. You don't have to just watch something you don't really like because, you know, that's all there is. Especially with podcasts, there's so many podcasts out there. It's oversaturated, yes, but also you have something out there that you can watch. You have something out there that is, you know, appeals to you. And even if it isn't in the, you know, top charts on Spotify, it's something that can bring you joy. It can inform you. It can, you know, it can entertain you. You don't have to just watch whatever is in the mainstream as being pushed out to you. You know, even people who are started in the entertainment industry, in that traditional media structure, have switched over to the podcast, doing their own podcast, and have found more success in that way. You know, I think of Megyn Kelly, I think of Tucker Carlson, I think of Candace Owens, I think of those people. And, you know, there's the fact that there's, you know, podcasts for everybody. You know, I admit those names I just mentioned are obviously on the right end of the political spectrum, but also that podcast, Midas Touch, is now currently, as of this recording, the number one podcast in the world, and there are several other podcasts on the side of on the left side of politics, if that's where you fall into. And that has really replaced the traditional kind of news media of that kind of mainstream corporate news of like CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and everything, so that you can have many different sources to get your news from. That's another way that the monoculture has faded, if not collapsed entirely. And I think that is good. I think that does enable a meritocracy, and I think that is best for artists, for all artists. And I think it's best for people in general. I don't like that, you don't have that shared experience where, you can you have a conversation with somebody you don't know, but hey, we want to talk about that show that we all saw last night, or that song that everybody knows. It's much harder for something to make a big impact, to break, to make a mark on everything. I think of Not Like Us by Kendrick Lamar. That was a huge song. That was everywhere. You would go out into the world and you would hear it, and everybody would be talking about it. It was performed at the Super Bowl. It just won 5 Grammys. It's the most awarded rap song ever. That was a phenomenon, as was the Barbie movie a year or two ago now. But those examples are so few and far between. It is really hard to make something that big anymore. Even think of like online, you would hear about the Brat album by Charlie XCX. You would hear about it all the time, but I would go out into the world, you wouldn't hear anybody talk about it. I wouldn't hear anybody who said, hey, if you heard this new album, it's really great. All this talk of Brat Summer and everything online that didn't really translate to the outside world. I haven't heard the album in full. I've heard a few songs that I really like, but it's just about that cultural conversation that has really changed. I think that studios and these massive corporations are in some ways kind of running off of the fumes of the past of the monoculture. I think of Max, previously HBO Max. They really feed off of Friends. I noticed, like, Friends is always at the top of the page. It was always one of the top streaming shows when it was on Netflix, and they have now a Friends-themed game show that's hosted by Whitney Cummings. They made a big event out of the 30th anniversary of the show. And I noticed too, Max, of course, owned by Warner Brothers, so they really capitalize on Harry Potter. There is a Harry Potter themed cooking show. I think it's called like Wizards of Baking or something. And they live off of that because that was popular in an era where where it was a big thing. It wasn't competing with every other streaming service and everybody on TikTok and every single song that was uploaded to Spotify every day. It didn't have to compete with anything. It was this big thing. Now, would have, Harry Potter, would have Friends, would have Seinfeld, would have, MASH or Cheers or any of these things, would they have become as big as they did if they didn't have to compete? Would they have become as big? Would they have, become the phenomenons that they are today without not having the competition? Would they have become as big if they didn't enjoy a lack of competition? I don't know. That's the thing. I really don't know. And I know, I'm sure anyone watching this, I'm sure there's people watching this who love Seinfeld and love Friends and love Harry Potter, and I don't deny that they're great shows or great movies or great anything, but I think that the increased competition is good for art in general. I think it's good for media. I think it's good for the general public. And I think that this is the trade-off. You know, everything in life is a trade-off, and I think I will take this world without a monoculture and diluted attention and things being less big over an era of corporate sponsorship and a world where everything has to be filtered through a massive corporation and the executives to get it to the people. I do prefer that personally. I want to ask you, anybody's watching this video, do you think that there is any good to come from the monoculture that isn't related to that shared experience? Do you think that we're better off with a monoculture? Do you think we're better off with less movies and less music and less shows? Do you think it's better to have one kind of authoritative source of entertainment? I want to know, because I can't think of really kind of any other thing besides that community experience that the monoculture benefits. And I have nostalgia for that era. I grew up in the 2000s, so I have so many feelings of nostalgia for movies, music, TV from that era. But I think we are, better off where, we have so much more options and artists have to compete, and I think even today, when we have certain things that are so big, like I mentioned, Taylor Swift, the whole public spectacle of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, and how Taylor Swift made the NFL bigger and everything like that. I think even that is such a diminished version of what celebrity and the monoculture used to be. So I think that is all I have to say today. I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video. Thank you to everybody who has seen all the episodes so far. The show is just only going to get better. On this channel, as I mentioned, the Oscars are tonight as I'm filming this. We'll have a recap video of the Oscars coming very soon. Some movie reviews on this channel and a lot else. So if you like these videos, let me know in the comments. Subscribe, tell your friends. You can also follow me on my personal Instagram there. And yeah, thank you guys for watching so much. What a time to be alive.